What do you think you're playing at, What have you been doing all day?
Sick of this. Why is it always you and her, This is my house. I make the rules. I matter!
Of course you matter. You both matter.
No, she's just like you fat cow.
Please keep your voice down. She'll hear us.
I don't give a shit. She's just like you.
No, darling, Mummy and Daddy have just talked.
Get out of here.
Pain, blame, fear, power,
Trauma,
threats,
denial.
control.
Every week in England and Wales, 2 women die as a result of domestic abuse. Children are also physically and emotionally damaged by family breakdown. Many families go to court searching for a solution, but end up frustrated and disillusioned. And recent cuts have made the family court system inaccessible to many. So what needs to change? To understand the nature of domestic abuse, we asked women who were victims to talk about their experiences. Their identities have been hidden to protect them and their children.
I met this guy and within 3 weeks I'd moved in with him. We got married. I got pregnant on honeymoon. Once I had the baby, then the physical violence started 6 weeks after he was born. He slapped me across the face while the baby was in my arms. That was the first time he hit me.
Julie Payton is a professional independent advisor supporting victims through the family court process.
1 in 3 women are said to suffer domestic abuse in Suffolk. The national average is 1 in 4. Domestic abuse is any form of power and control, really, that you feel intimidated by, frightened by on a continuing basis. And the stories we've heard today are very typical of the usual build-up to domestic abuse relationships. They don't tend to start off that way. They tend to be charming people and everything seems fine and jolly, and then it sort of erodes into an abusive relationship generally. It doesn't usually start out that way.
For the parents, it's a tragedy. For the children involved, it's a disaster.
It just escalated and escalated. It was mental abuse. It became vindictive and a gradual decline of my liberty. My child started to exhibit strange behaviour around food, and also if my ex came anywhere near him.
Rosemary Rayner is a chartered clinical psychologist. She has first-hand knowledge of the effects of domestic abuse on children.
If you've got a family where there's been consistent domestic violence, often the children get more anxious, can get anxious for the mother, if it's the mother who's having the violence. But at the same time, it may be the first time in their lives they've had a regular routine, they've had quiet nights where they can go to sleep without hearing violent arguments. And for them, it's a strange experience that they have to get used to.
For women who have made the big break and have managed to leave the matrimonial home, the journey to freedom is just beginning. Especially if there are children and the court gets involved. Family courts have recently gone through some big changes, including putting a 26-week maximum on the amount of time spent on deciding a case. There have also been other changes that have seriously restricted access to legal aid. Judge Nick Crichton has specialised in family law for over 20 years.
The withdrawal of legal aid from providing representation and providing support and assistance to vulnerable people, particularly mothers suffering from domestic violence and abuse, has been less than helpful.
If you don't have legal advice or legal representation in the court, you may well be cross-examined by the perpetrator of the abuse, so the person who has harmed you, which is also terrifying.
It's extremely worrying. I don't think a woman should ever be put in that position, and I can think of some really quite awful situations.
Many of my clients, who have all been women because I work with women, are unable to seek any legal representation, and more services such as ours, who are not legally qualified, are asked to come into the courts and try and support them in the best way we can. But that's obviously not the best way to get justice.
There was no legal aid, and in court I had to represent myself. I was terrified. My ex-husband, the one who abused us, cross-examined me. I'm really scared I'm going to lose my son.
I think one of the most important things is that many families in a violent situation will no longer be going to court, which means that they will be caught up in the cycle of violence for longer before anybody intervenes, because they just cannot afford to. It takes a huge amount of courage for a woman to ask for help if she's in a violent situation, or to leave the situation. She's not going to be able to afford her own proceedings.
And another thing, right? You do that again.
Don't! You're scaring her.
Scaring her? Pick it up! You're not scared? Are you, sweetheart?
No.
I'm concerned about the more recent changes, which means that the assessments have been cut down in terms of the time taken, and that's not always a good thing. Although you don't want a hugely lengthy process, you do want a thorough process, and you can't do it within the timescale now. And there's much less reliance on experts, and I'm not saying that just because I'm an expert. It's just that certainly psychologists and some of the other experts used by a court had a particular expertise to offer, and I'm concerned that that's now no longer available to the judges.
I believe that in order for a family court judge to make the best decisions for children and their families, he needs information. He needs the most focused assessments of the situation by social workers, by CAFCAS, and if necessary by psychologists and psychiatrists in cases that require that, because he can't do it all on his own in the courtroom.
Unfortunately, with such a small amount of assessment and without the input of all the professionals surrounding the child, then to our mind within the Dignity Group, and as is my experience of working within this role for the last 3 years, that we are not really hitting the nub of the problem and ensuring that we have a holistic assessment process. Judges will say we can only making choices based on the information we have to hand. Well, our campaign is around, well, make sure you have the information to hand then, because these are life-changing decisions for our children.
The judge didn't listen to me, and nor did the professionals, and they're the ones that are supposed to help. I'm shell-shocked. The court's decision just isn't safe for my child.
One case comes to mind, there wasn't actually violence involved, but it shows the kind of underpinnings that are thinking. This poor child was literally going backwards and forwards between the two houses so that there was an even share of time. And you kind of had to stop and think, even share for who? Because this poor child had no base. It couldn't actually form a secure setting anywhere. It was continually batting backwards and forwards. Now, if you add violence and trauma into that experience, then it's even more difficult. Very often children themselves don't want to be in contact with someone who's been violent because they're frightened too. And you cannot force a child into that situation again. So I think it has to be seen from the child's perspective.
I'm 9. I don't want to see my dad, but nobody listens. They make me see him, and that frightens me.
I don't think adults have rights in relation to children. I think children have rights and adults have responsibilities. I think a child has a right to a relationship with his father, and the father has a responsibility to make that relationship, to make contact safe for the child. And I'm not talking just about physically safe, I'm talking about emotionally safe.
Well, unless we change the situation to give more access to courts for people caught up in domestic violence, then the children stay there longer, the mother stays there longer, and as a society we're going to pay a huge price, not just short term with all the services that get involved mopping up the situation, but in the long term too, because domestic violence, experience of domestic violence, actually affects children's long term development and relationships as well.
Listening to what children have to tell us is tremendously important, and I am passionate about the importance of listening to what children have to say to us, and about the importance of children feeling listened to.
While Julie Peyton agrees, she thinks the courts should go further.
We want mother's evidence, father's evidence, and for them to be seen as experts. The judiciary really believing in the expertise of the mother or the father. We want the voice of the child to be heard, we want thorough assessment, and we want to make sure that the parents' expert knowledge is really listened to.
What I would really like to see is more multidisciplinary teams doing collaborative work with parents to try to understand the whole of the family background and what is the best way forward for this child.
My passion lies in ensuring and trying to ensure that we all have happy lives, that we're not subjected to misery. So my main reason for doing this is that in my heart, and it is heartfelt, and I am passionate about my work, that we can make a better place for people to live.
Oh, darling, we're going to Auntie's for a little while. Come on, darling. Just going to Auntie's for a few days. It'll be really fun, won't it? Yeah. I'm just going to give her a call, okay?
What's all this then, eh? Where are you going?
Oh, we're just going to my sister's for a few days.
No, I don't think so. We've spoken about this, haven't we? You're not going anywhere. In you go. Come on. After you, sweetheart. You knew I'd have to do this again, didn't you?
Get off me!
Oh, shut up!
Don't touch me!
Shut up!
Please!
Shut